Weirdos, welcome back to my channel. My name is EmmaAbe. We're on a road to recovery. If you didn't see my video last week, because it was of a subject matter you guys weren't remotely interested in, which is coding. That's okay. Last week I had a really rough week. I'm slowly recovering. It's probably one of the worst weeks I've had since the beginning of the pandemic. Definitely one of the lowest, if not the lowest point. And I don't want to talk about it beyond that. But I've decided that what I needed to do in order to help myself continue with life is to be on camera. So I'm going to be doing my February wrap up, and I've got our little baby here with us to be cute and cuddly this whole time, right? That's what you're so good at, right? Oh my god, I do not know what I would do if I did not have this little girl right here. What would I do? Be sad and cry all the time. Yeah, this girl's been one of the few things that's been able to help make me laugh. I also have one of my brother's smoothies. He's so good at making smoothies. Oh my god. 10 out of 10. If you can ever convince him to make a smoothie for you, do it. I think they're wonderful. I read 11 books in February, and 8 of those were like out of obligation for various things. So I also decided to participate in the Black Lit Readathon. The first book I read is Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi. So the whole conceit of this book is that it's written for younger audience, and by younger I mean like teenagers, and it's an adaptation of Stamped from the Beginning, which is a book by Ibram X. Kendi that now I really want to read, which is a whole book about racism and the history of racism, particularly when dealing with African Americans in America. It's not all encompassing. It's really focused on race relations between African Americans and whites. But I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I thought it was a great book to start off February with. This is a book I chose to read for the Black Lit Readathon. I thought the audiobook was phenomenal. I believe Jason Reynolds reads it himself, and he just brought so much gravitas to it, made it really enjoyable. And in between chapters, they would play some music, which I thought was great. Just had a fun time reading the book, even though it didn't necessarily dive into the level of depth and detail I wanted. It was still a really fun romp through history. I mean, as fun as things like slavery can be and racism, but the language that they would use was just really fun and made it so much more accessible for people. So it'd say some things like "you dig," and it was used like slang and vernacular that you don't typically see in nonfiction books. And this also won the Goodreads Choice Award for nonfiction, which I found really funny because in the beginning of the book, they're like, this isn't a nonfiction book. Or at least it's not a nonfiction book that you are used to reading. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's really funny because it literally won the nonfiction category for the Goodreads Choice Awards. Don't lick my microphone. Sorry, it's one of those days when I need lots of cuddles. Also, since it was February, the reading for the BookTube prize began. So that's very exciting. So we have 2 months to read 6 books, and I read 3 books for that this month. I can't tell you anything about them other than like their names and their authors. So the next book I read in February was Notes on a Silencing by Lacey Crawford. And that is something I read for the BookTube prize. So wait for that video at the end of March to get my feelings about that book. Okay, the next book I read was The Art of Possibility by Roseman, Stone, Xander, and Benjamin Xander. And this is very much like a self-help book. And I thought it was going to focus primarily on teaching because that's why I read it. So I didn't pick this book up by my own volition. I was not forced to read this, but given the book by my boss at my teaching gig right now. And he's a mentor, someone that I really, really look up to and really, really value his feedback and everything. And so when he told me to read this book, of course, I'm going to read this book. And he actually gave me his personal copy. So that's why I don't have it here. So I had to give it back. And I've been reading that book basically since January. It took me a while because I wanted to get my hands on the audiobook, which again, 10 out of 10, does a really good job. I'm not sure if the authors themselves narrate it, but they get 2 different actors to narrate it, which brings a lot of levity, and it brings the like almost banter that the authors have in the book really much to life. Benjamin, he is a like conductor, I believe, and a musician. He teaches music, all of that fun stuff. And he talks a lot of his experience like with music, and every time they refer to any piece of music or any concert that he gives, they play that piece of music, which I thought was very nice. And then she, I believe, is a therapist, like a couples therapist or something like that. Yeah, like I said, their banter is probably like the best part. So it's very much like a self-help book, an approach to how can we approach things to make sure that the possibilities for everybody are opened up. And it has a lot of really good advice that would not only be applicable for like teaching, which I think that the concept, there's this concept in the book called giving an A, and that's kind of the concept of where the moment someone walks into a room, you believe that they can do their best, and you don't judge them. Don't think, oh, because they're, I don't know, wearing saggy pants, like they can't succeed in whatever they're doing. So in my case, that they can't succeed in this class. You want to look at every single person that walks into the room that you're going to be working with as someone who can do their job to the fullest of their ability and treat them as such, which I just loved. I loved a lot of what they were talking about. Another one of their concepts that I really, really loved is using like we-based our language. So instead of saying like, you didn't do your homework, so I can't like improve your grade, be like, what can we do to ensure success in this class? And just kind of rearranging your thinking from like, oh, a you versus I to we're going to work together towards a goal, I think is great. It would even they used a lot of examples that would help for like relationships. Yeah, I enjoyed that book, even though it isn't like my typical go-to nonfiction. The next book I read is Splendid and the Vile, the saga of Churchill family and defiance during the Blitz by Eric Larson. I read this for the BookTube prize. So again, wait for my thoughts on that later. The next book I read was Mama's Boy, Stories from Our Americas by Dustin Lance Black. If you don't know, Dustin Lance Black is the dude who wrote the script for the movie Milk, which he won an Oscar for screenwriting that, and he was also the dude that lobbied a lot and pushed a lot in the court cases that got gay marriage in the federal government approved. I read this book for a book club that I'm part of at my work, which we actually just had the meeting about that today, which is very interesting. So I went into this assuming it was like a fiction book because the cover gives off the idea that it's a fiction book when it's not. It's actually a memoir, and it's Dustin Lance Black's memoir. And it took me a while to get into it because I was a little bit confused because we spent a lot of time learning about his mom, which, bear with it, it pays off in the end. It really is a really fabulous memoir. But Dustin Lance Black grew up in the South, in Texas, in a Mormon community. So he grew up Mormon, and holy cannoli, and he's also gay. You know, anything about Mormons and gays is that they don't like them, which is ridiculous, isn't it? The Mormon doctrine about gay people is ridiculous. Anyway, so he grew up with a lot of that guilt, and in the beginning it talks a lot about his guilt and how he felt like he wasn't going to be able to be with his family, which he loved so dearly because he was gay. I have a zero tolerance policy for religions that say shit like that. I was very lucky in my own coming out journey to not have to deal with that. But I've seen firsthand some of my friends who've almost died because of religious persecution based on the fact that they're queer. I have zero tolerance for religions being like, hey, your entire existence is a sin. I think it's fucking ridiculous. Anyway, I'm gonna get off my soapbox because that's just something that really, really bothers me. I really like the way that Dustin Lance Black writes. He narrates the audiobook too, and that just made it super powerful because I read this on audio. The way he talks about his mom and his brother, I was getting really, really choked up. But unfortunately, I was in a room full of my students when I was finishing the book, so I couldn't exactly like cry the way I wanted to. Yeah, just really, really powerful memoir about family and not letting something like your beliefs come in the way of what's important, which is family. Isn't that right, baby? Isn't that right? You want to tell them that's right? The family's most important. That you should love people no matter what, even their differences. Yeah? Yeah. She agrees, right? Yeah, you agree? Tell them you agree. Tell them you agree. She doesn't, she just wants to cuddle. Yeah, so that's my take on that. Very, very good. It's probably one of my favorite books I read. Then we have the third Rainbow Girl, The Long Life of a Double Murder in Appalachia by Emma Copley Eisenberg. And I read that for the BookTube prize. So can't tell you any of my opinions on that. But look out, end of March. End of March. Great. So the next book is The Quality School Teacher. This is by William Glasser, and this is another book that was given to me by my boss to read, and I found some of the strategies in it to be interesting, and it's the like kind of sequel, but not really, because that's not really it's more of a companion book to this Quality School. And I thought there were a lot of good strategies in there. It's like a really short book. It's like 100 pages. I read it with my eyeballs. There are some points where he's just very, very like methodical, and he'll be like, oh, if you tell them to do this, then the students will do that. And I was just like, I don't think everybody's mind works as analytically and structured as you think they do. That part was a little bit weird and off, but some of the good ideas in terms of how to motivate kids and teach kids like what is a good quality work and ideas for like projects. Would I recommend you guys to read this? No, not unless you're really getting into like the nitty gritty of teaching strategies, which is why I read it. I could have read it in a day, but I stretched out for a week. The next book I read is this dude, Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. This is not my favorite Toni Morrison that I've read, and seeing as this is my second one, there's not a lot to compare to, but I mean, Beloved was my first one, and I think it's pretty hard to top Beloved. However, the discussions of race and all of that is, I mean, it's Toni Morrison. It's peak. I love the almost like magical realism bits to it. For me, there was a little bit too much incest, super uncomfy. I was like, could not get behind Milkman doing what he was doing. And in the book, they're like, some of like the supporting characters are like, that be nasty, no thanks. That being said, I really liked the character of Guitar. Guitar was great. I really, really liked Guitar. He's best friends with Milkman, who's the main character, and he brings a perspective on what being Black in America is like that Milkman doesn't always get, because Milkman is from like a more middle income family, and with Guitar you get to see more of that desperation of what it is like to survive, really starting at like zero in America, and the frustration and the racial frustration that happens from not getting justice. I liked Milkman's aunt, Pilot. She was great. I liked the kind of adventure that Milkman goes on in the end. For the most part, I think there was a lot more things to really like about this book than didn't. Still doesn't beat Beloved for me. Still really solid Toni Morrison. And if you like that almost magical, like, realism aspect that she brings to her books and her writing styles, then you'll definitely like this. The next book I read is Strange Planet by Nathan W. Pyle. And this won the humor category for the Goodreads Choice Awards. And I was like skeptical about it. It's a graphic novel / comic. They don't make that super clear. So when I was looking for audiobooks of it and I couldn't find it, I was hella confused. Once I started reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, it's little like snippets, and I'll insert some of like my favorite parts. You can tell I read this book last week. If you can't tell that from the bits that I chose, I was in a very not good space. Goes by real quick. You can do it in the afternoon, easy. I would just like read this kind of in between like my classes or when I had some downtime. Basically, you follow these little aliens, these little blue aliens. None of them have names, and you're just seeing them through like vignettes in their life. They're all probably about 1 to 2 pages long. The language that is used in it is just very logical, and it just makes it very full of humor. So I liked it. The next book I read is this big boy, this chunker, the Going Down the Jericho Road, the Memphis Strike, Martin Luther King's Last Campaign by Michael K. Honey. And this comes in at over 500 pages. I made the decision that I was going to read this instead of a shorter book. I'm ultimately glad I read this because this is now off my TBR. It's another book I read for the Blacklit Challenge. This is a nonfiction book, and this does not have an audiobook. So I read all those 500 pages with my eyeballs, which it's always good to do that. I really loved the discussion of King in this, especially towards the end of the book. I think it just goes to show like King's legacy and how a lot of people have lots of like misconceptions when it comes to King in terms of like what he specifically believed. At the end, seeing the horror of losing King, how it hurt so many people. I liked that you got to spend some time with the strikers. But beyond that, like, I don't really have much else to say about it. Like, I thought it was good. I thought it was fair. It didn't really shock me or stand out particularly in any way, but it was just very good, informative. If you really wanted this tiny sliver of what Martin Luther King like movements were like, this would probably be really good like after you had a better like overall picture of what those movements were and you just wanted to look really particularly at what was happening in Memphis. This is not a good book to start doing that research or start doing research about Martin Luther King. I still really enjoyed it. Okay, last book. Oh, I felt like I finished these so long ago. That's probably because I did. I just haven't finished any other books in February. I've started like 3 more, and I'm like halfway through a bunch of them, but just didn't finish by February 28th. So this last book I read is Native Son, and this is long, but it is worth every second. It's separated into 3 parts, and beyond that, there's no chapters. And I felt like it was all warranted. Having this slow build up to what happens at the end, it pays off. At the first bit, you might be like, okay, what is really happening? But once the main character, Bigger, gets employed, things start taking a turn. And the whole time I was reading this, I felt really conflicted because Bigger, the main character, is not an innocent party. He does wind up killing this girl, and he does wind up committing another murder and a rape. And even though you could say that he doesn't rape this one character, he still definitely sexually assaults her. Isn't addressed fully like the way I wanted it to be. They escalate it up to a rape accusation in the book, which I understand isn't fair, but I mean, he still definitely violated her before murdering her. And having that violation acknowledged in the way that it like properly acknowledged doesn't really happen in the book, but I also wasn't expecting it to, because I believe this book was written in the 50s or the 30s. It's set in the 30s, 1940. Again, deals a lot with the racial tensions and racial frustrations that were happening at the time, and it's a lot of echoing what is still going on. And I think the scene towards the end where they have just one of the characters goes on this monologue about how we are all a little bit complicit in what Bigger did, because Bigger was never put on equal ground in terms of what the other white people were going on. It's a frustrating like discussion, and this whole time race is at the center point of this book, because Bigger is an African American man, and he knows right from the minute that he murders this girl that they are going to get him. And that drives a lot of what he is doing. That he knew it was going to get blown out of proportion, and he wasn't going to be able to save himself. And that weight and that pressure like building throughout the book is so worth it. What I found really funny was a lot of the characters that were in any way like painted in a sympathetic light were a lot of like his family, which makes sense. They're these poor dudes, and all of the communists in this, which I wasn't expecting, especially a book coming out from the 40s to paint communists in such a good light, especially when they were treated the way they were treated in the 40s, which wasn't good. I mean, whole Red Scare thing happened later, and the whole Lavender Scare, which happened even later, like, annoying. That prejudice against communists is also a lot discussed in the book. I wasn't expecting all of that talk and discussion about communism happening in this book too. I'd be really interested to see and find out more about Richard Wright specifically and where he fell on that spectrum of political ideological beliefs. Really, really good book. I really, really enjoyed it. Whenever I would put it down to pick up another book that I was reading, I always wanted to go back to it really fast. I would recommend this book to you. Well, that was my reading month. I think I had a very good reading month given kind of the curveball that was thrown at me at the end of the month. Like, comment, subscribe. Say bye-bye, baby. Say goodbye to the people. Bye-bye. All right, what is the favorite book that you read in February? Bye.